Hello and welcome back to 1874 in association with NordVPN. You can get a huge discount of 4 months free if you head to 1874.io/NordVPN, and it's completely risk-free because Nord offer a 30-day money-back guarantee. It's time for Gregg Evans and myself's weekly podcast here on 1874, and today it's an Unai Emery special. Greg and I were kind of having a discussion about what we should talk about, and we got into a couple of things about Villa, didn't we, Greg? A couple of differing opinions, and then we were like, right, let's just save it for the podcast. So it was you initially that said you wanted to focus on Emery, and then in our WhatsApp we kind of went off on a few different tangents. So today we're going to try and put that in podcast form.
Yeah, let's go for it. I think it's a good time. You know, we're a week into the summer, and I'm not sure why, but perhaps that's why I'm feeling so good today. Or maybe it's because we're recording a little bit later. I can't ever recall feeling this fresh on a podcast. Is that because it's later, or is it because I've had the weekend off? I don't know.
Probably a bit of both. I mean, I will say the only reason we ever record early is because of you, because I would never ever suggest an early film. That's not for me. I much prefer to have got into my day a little bit. I always feel fresher and feel like I perform better when I've had a bit of time. But Gregg Evans likes an early start mainly because he likes to get on the golf course.
No, it's not that this year. I think largely because during the season I'm up really, really early and try to go to bed quite early. But I tend to sort of get up about 5 o'clock during the season and just try and plan my day accordingly throughout that. But over the summer, and I think because of the lighter nights and the fact that I can do more on the night, you know, because there's so much light, I tend to go to bed a bit later, so I get up a bit later. But maybe we should look back over the years and see what time we've recorded, because over the summer it probably extends a little bit into the afternoon. So, but anyway, you know, that's that.
This has turned into an episode of the High Performance Podcast. You talking about when you get up. So, Greg, what does high performance mean to you?
I'm just going to check my Whoop and see how many hours I got sleep.
Who was talking? Someone was talking to me about a Whoop.
No, I haven't.
Someone actually was talking to me about it the other day. I can't remember who it was, and I was like, "What is a Whoop?" And then the whole life was getting dictated to by this Whoop. I was a podcast. I was listening to a podcast.
What I would say is have who is monitoring or tracking their sleep and has young children is just wasting their time, because I have considered at times thinking, yeah, should I monitor my sleep to see just, you know, how much I am missing out on? But it's just pointless with an 18-month-old.
Yeah, I mean, if we were to monitor the audience's sleep, they'd probably all be asleep now with us two talking about sleep. So we should probably move on.
Let's get into football.
To the topic that we came here to talk about today. And the topic today, Greg, is Aston Villa's outstanding manager, Unai Emery. Now, when we were kind of conjuring up an idea of what to talk about, you had some quite interesting opinions. I don't think necessarily they were your opinions, but you were throwing out stuff that you've heard and stuff that's out there around Villa's Basque manager.
Yeah, look. Today we're going to get into this. I think we're just going to cover some breaking news, because just as we started the podcast, Aston Villa announced that Francesco Calvo was going to become the new president of business operations, replacing Chris Heck. Something we've reported on in The Athletic for a few weeks now. We knew this was happening, but that's official now. So Villa are getting an experienced sort of operator in that position. 47 years old, a couple of years younger than Dan, so yeah, quite a good age.
I knew you were going to say
that. But look, you know, throughout his career, he's been known as a relatively young director, hasn't he? When he was at Roma, Barcelona, more recently Juventus. The real pull for Villa is the fact that he's worked at these really big clubs in a variety of roles. His brief will be very similar to what Chris Heck's was. Has to continue increasing revenue at the club. That's going to be slightly difficult this season with Villa not in the Champions League again, but it will be his task to do that. What I do find really interesting is whether he will get closer to the footballing team because of his links with Monchi. You know, he knows Ramon from his time at Roma. Will he have a little bit more of an impact perhaps than Heck did, because Heck was very much business only, no interfering with the football. Perhaps Calvo will be able to mix in a little bit more. Let's wait and see what that brings. But yeah, very briefly, an experienced operator who is he's known to the Villa staff already because of his links with Monchi, and somebody who can help drive the club forward, hopefully.
I think that's better. That instantly sits better with me, that I feel like he has more of an idea about football in general. And I'm not saying you need to know about football to do every job at Aston Villa, because that's not possible. But I think it was quite noticeable that the football department was very distanced from Heck's department. I think I looked at them as two separate entities, where I think if you're a good business that's going to go in the right way, everyone's got to be pulling in the kind of same direction. So I like already that he feels a bit more football based to me.
Yeah, I mean, look, time will tell to see how the roles differ. Essentially, it's going to be very similar to the brief that he's got.
Yeah, of course.
Look, there's nothing wrong really with having expertise in business within a football club, providing the football side of things is working well. And look, it is at Villa, I'd say. The football side of things going really well. It adds to, I think, the sort of the stronghold almost of the connection, with Emery and his team. Yes, they, of course, Villa want it all connected, and so will the owners, Nassif Sawiris and Wes Edens. And look, those are the guys who have appointed this new operator, because they have the overriding say in anything that happens at Villa. So, yeah, a unified and real together, a group pulling together is important. So let's see what the future holds.
And I would say as well that I've no doubt that some of the remits are going to be exactly the same as what Chris Heck was asked to do. And people will know my thoughts on Chris Heck. But I think there's a way of doing things. And I'm hoping that Calvo can come in, and although some of the end results might be the same, I think there's a way of going about business and a way about doing things. And I'm hoping he can be more aligned with what I'd like to see and a lot of Villa fans would like to see. So thank you for that update, Greg. Let's now talk about Unai Emery. Then just explain why you came up with this topic this week and you wanted to specifically focus on Unai.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm going to put my points across first. I think Unai Emery is a fantastic manager, an elite level coach who's taken Villa forward. He came in at a time when Villa were on their knees and has helped transform the club. Now, the key for me is the word helped there. He hasn't transformed Aston Villa. He's helped to transform Aston Villa. Without him, do Villa get into the Champions League at the stage that they did? Probably not. You could almost 99% say no. But a couple of questions, and I think rightly so, are starting to be raised, certainly from the back end of Villa season, about big games that Villa have gone missing in. And I don't see there being a problem of absolutely loving Unai Emery. And let's get this right. Since November 2022, we've spoken about him in such a positive light, so much admiration, so much pride from Villa supporters in having him as their manager. We've spoken very positively about him, but the last few weeks there have been some disappointing performances that have cost Villa pretty bad. An FA Cup semi-final defeat to Crystal Palace, and then the no-show on the final day of the season where Villa weren't able to qualify for the Champions League. So, yeah, in short, I don't think it's an issue for Villa fans to be highlighting some of those games and saying, look, why did they go wrong? Because we can still say that Emery's a brilliant manager and has helped transform the club. But in a couple of key moments towards the end of this season, it's gone wrong. And if we've praised the manager for all of the good times that have happened over the last 2.5 years, and there are so many, and we will go over some of those and remind supporters about some of those, because there are far more than outweigh the bad, let's be honest. But there's nothing wrong with saying that perhaps the manager could have done better in some of the other games then that didn't go so well.
We're kind of broadly going to look across 3 seasons here. Obviously, his first season, he wasn't there for the entirety of it, which makes what he achieved actually in that first season absolutely exceptional in my mind. So the first season, I think we can say he went above and beyond and achieved an objective there that I don't think anyone would have set out when he walked through the door. The fact that Villa qualified instantly for Europe in his first kind of half a season was a magnificent achievement, and set the club on the way to the beast that it is now. Qualifying for Europe was a massive thing, and it kept up Unai Emery's record of being a manager that consistently fights in European football. Second season, again, I think people were like saying we could get Champions League, but it was no way. I don't think it was like a club objective at that point to get into the top four and finish fourth that season. I don't think that would have been something that was outlined at the start of the season. So they did that, which again, unbelievable achievement. Conference League kind of fell short right at the end, which I suppose leans into what you've just said about the big occasion, and we'll go on and we'll analyse further games. And then last season, just fell short in terms of qualifying for the Champions League. They qualified for Europe again, which is a magnificent achievement. And they've let themselves down in the FA Cup semis and ultimately let themselves down on the last day of the season. But across all that stuff that I've just listed, there's kind of more successes than failures. And I guess when the day he leaves, which we hope is a long time away, we'll look back at all these things. And I think we might be able to say that what's happened the season just gone ended up being a positive because we learned things, lessons were learned, and we built on it, and we kind of got to where we wanted to be the season after, or the season after that. You won't know until he leaves about how certain things are going to affect the football club. But at the moment, he's definitely there's been big tests that he has passed. But I do take your point that probably this season more than the other two, when it's come to the absolute crunch, we haven't quite done it for whatever reason.
Yeah, and I agree with a lot of what you've just said there, and really important to point out that there's been a lot more good than bad. The one thing I would just disagree with is there's not one single bit of positivity about missing out on the Champions League. I don't think whatever happens in future seasons will take away the disappointment, frustration, pain, annoyance, any word that you can think of it to describe missing out on the Champions League.
Why if they win the Europa League and get back in the Champions League through that route next season? Could you not then look back at it and say, ultimately, that's turned into being a good thing? Let's say Villa don't finish top four, top five, they finish seventh and win the Europa League and get back into the Champions League. Villa, as much as we all love them, they're not going to win the Champions League, I don't think. Although, things have transpired in a slightly different way they could have done this season, I suppose.
No, I would just argue that is all a negative because, if Villa finish seventh, it means they've gone backwards, and these owners and everyone associated with Villa don't want to go backwards ever. So Villa are looking at finishing higher than sixth next season. So if they if in this really unusual scenario that you draw up, they won the Europa League and they finished seventh, that for me
it was unusual, to be fair, what I came out with. So thank you for pointing that out. I don't know why I came out with it.
That's a bad season next season, unfortunately, because they've finished lower than they finished this season. So I just Villa have missed out on the Champions League. Really, really unfortunate in the way they missed out on it because it was so close. But they've got themselves to blame. Let's just deal with those facts, unfortunately, and just accept that Villa missing out on the Champions League is a frustration. And there's nothing really that's going to make up for that, because the finances are going to be hit. The players that they're going to want to be able to sign are going to take a hit. The list of targets are going to be slightly different now. Hopefully not too much different, and hopefully a lot of players will look at Aston Villa now and see that they are a club still on the up, and a really attractive club to come and join. And I pretty much believe that will be the case, because Villa have been able to attract high level players before they were in the Champions League as well. So I don't see that being too much of an issue, but they could have kicked on another level, and we all know that, don't we?
That's why I like doing pods with you, because I think we look at things differently, because there's always, as much as I try and be professional, there's going to be an element of bias from me, because I am a Villa fan, where you can look at things in a slightly different way to me because you're not a Villa fan. So ultimately what you've just said, you're saying the club will look at the season just gone, that's ultimately a failure because they finished 2 league places below where they did the season before, not got Champions League, and they've not won anything. So is that how the club look at it? And Emery, will they look at it as being a failure because of those reasons?
In some ways they will, because the objective was to get back into the Champions League. Once you've tasted it, you don't ever want to go out. Unai Emery has come out and spoken many times in the last couple of weeks and said that European competition again was the minimum aim. He said, look, we're going into the last couple of games, we don't know whether we're going to be Europa Conference League, Europa League and Champions League. So judging by that, the minimum requirement for Villa was to get into Europe again, and they did that. So I wouldn't describe the season as a failure. I'd say I'd describe him missing out on the Champions League as a failure. But the season as a whole, no, because again, there has been some progress. The league position doesn't show that, but look at the way that Villa competed in the Champions League. We're gonna highlight some of the games that have been debated about amongst the fan bases as sort of big games that have gone missing. Olympiacos over the double header would be one of those. The Crystal Palace game, the Man United game, obviously the final day of the season. Got to, as brilliant as PSG are and as amazing as they were in the final, got to look at that and think there was absolutely no way in the plan that Villa prepared to be 5-1 down in the tie, right? They went and ultimately won the home game 3-2 and were brilliant for a period of that game. But that was only when they were 5-1 down, remember? And the whatever plan Emery and the players had put into place, it hadn't worked, has it? So 5-1 down in the tie. It was when they were completely free of any sort of hope, really. They were out of the tie that they started to play.
Almost like the shackles are off.
Yeah. It's just you're 5-1 down, you're out, aren't you? What do you do next? You sink or swim, really, I suppose. And they decided to just absolutely go for it, and that wouldn't have been in the plan. So perhaps, and again, I qualify it with as good as PSG were, and the fact that they beat every English club on the way to winning the Champions League and are clearly the most dominant force in Europe and the world right now. That was another big game that went missing, really, wasn't it?
You touched on something really interesting here that just jumped into my head as you've been talking. So the big games that we've just spoken about, everyone would have heard the games that you just said. Actually, in those ties/games, Villa never went ahead in any of them. So you've always been the chaser. And we want Villa to get to that point where that, they've got that elite mentality. And maybe that's something that we're talking about where Villa just fall short at the moment, that they don't kind of have that elite mentality. The elite mentality is going ahead and going. Villa have won big games, but I think of the biggest game that I can think of that Villa won under Emery, probably the Bayern Munich game at home. First home game back in the Champions League. When I say there's no pressure, I don't mean there's no pressure, but it's kind of like they've won the first group game. It's the second. I mean, I found myself agreeing with what you're saying here, which wasn't what I was expecting. First home game, there was almost no pressure there, whereas the other ties that we're talking about, there is that element of pressure. So you could argue that actually this Villa team hasn't handled pressure brilliantly.
You can look at last year. I mean, even the Lille game, you look at it, and I think they lost the away game, but then went and won on it on penalties. So they showed a bit of a different mentality there to get over the line. Look, what I would say is they've won 13 out of the last 17 games this season in all competitions, against some good sides along the way. So to do that is very difficult. The games that went missing were the Man City lost in the last minute. That was really disappointing, wasn't it? The Palace.
I can forgive that, though. I can forgive that one and write it off.
And look, you can forgive losses, of course. The team are going to lose games, but if we're just picking out games in isolation, it's the Man City game, the Man United game, the Crystal Palace semi-final, and can't remember.
Olympiacos.
Olympiacos is the main one. But then you flip it round and think of all the times where under Emery, Villa have been amazing. They won the very first game against Manchester United 3-1 against a team who they always struggled against. Again, Villa were on their knees at that point, looking nervously over their shoulder at relegation. They won that game. You look back to the back end of that season, I think they had
they went 10
Tottenham. They're Tottenham, Liverpool and Brighton in the last three games, and took 7 points out of a possible 9 to get them into Europe. So that was playing under a lot of pressure in big moments, in big games where games really mattered, and they got over the line there. And they were almost playing like this season knockout football, weren't they? The second half of the season, because as soon as they lost a game or 2 games in a row, that they had no chance of getting into the Champions League. We spoke about it a couple of months ago, and I remember foolishly thinking that Villa only needed 5 wins out of the final 9 games to get into the Champions League. And I had friends texting me after that specific podcast saying, I think you've miscalculated this because our estimations are probably they're going to need 7 or 8 wins, and looking back on it, they would that they were accurate and I was wrong there. So Villa did a lot right the second half of the season. And you look back, and the failure to not get into the Champions League probably would have been by not beating Ipswich twice, not beating Manchester United twice, failing to beat Tottenham at home. Away, wasn't it, when they lost 4-1?
Got battered.
So those are the games really that have caused the problems. It's not so much losing to Manchester City in the last minute, so close to the end of the season, and then the final day no-show at Man United, because events like that just can happen anyway. It's just, I think the reason we're doing this podcast now is because Villa fans have started saying over the last couple of months, quite a few big games now have gone missing for us. Is there a bit of a trend developing?
What do you think that trend is? Because we can't deny that the kind of PSG, forget that. But the two real pivotal moments of Villa's season were probably the Crystal Palace FA Cup semi-final and Manchester United on the last day. Now, I think back to both of those games, I kind of think of Villa as, obviously we weren't at our best because we didn't turn up to either showing, but Villa being a bit passive. Not the Villa, when Villa are full tilt and they're going well. I think of Newcastle at home. That's the Villa I think of under Unai Emery. That's, I think of when we beat Manchester City at home the season before, the Newcastle in Emery's first season. Yeah. They're the games I think of and think, that's Unai Emery's Villa. That's what Unai Emery's Villa does. They don't do what happened in that Manchester United away game in the Crystal Palace FA Cup semi-final. So why did those things happen, Greg? I mean, obviously, if you knew the answer, then you'd probably be working for Villa, but you catch my drift.
Yeah, I mean, look, is it an issue towards the end of the season again, where there's a bit of tiredness kicking in, and they've been for a really long, arduous season again, haven't they? Last season, when things were going wrong, we put it down to injuries. But you look at the way that Villa sort of limped over the line to get into the Champions League. It was only because Tottenham was so poor that Villa were able to get it done in the end. Because
we were quite fortunate in the back end of that season. I've got to say.
There were some. It was a shocking run of form from Tottenham, But look, Villa accumulated enough points over the course of the season to rightly deserve to be in the Champions League. So nobody can take that away from them, and we must recognise that was a brilliant achievement. But a similar trend was kicking in towards this back end of the season, because there were a couple of results that just didn't go the way, really. I don't know what it is. I don't know. I think. Palace won the FA Cup, so full credit to them. They went and beat Manchester City in the final, so it's not like they're just this team of no-hopers. They're an excellent team as well, managed by a guy who is very highly rated and has had success previously. So he's a very good manager in his own right. Having written about Liverpool this season and listened to a lot of people saying that Liverpool were gifted the title because of a lack of quality around them, my thoughts on that were the opposite, really. I think the Premier League's stronger than it's ever been, and I think there's teams like Bournemouth and Fulham and Forest who we didn't expect to be doing really well, but are able to take points off the better teams, and Liverpool were just the only team really that pulled it all together this year. So I think the Premier League was just really, really strong.
Yeah, you said something interesting to me on text. I think it was yesterday, where I don't think you weren't trying to be disrespectful to Emery in what you were saying, and neither of us would ever do that, because I love him and he's the best manager I've ever seen Villa have, and I wouldn't change him for anyone. I genuinely mean that, and I know how much, as a non-Villa fan, I know how much respect that you have for Unai Emery as well. So you said almost that Villa is the perfect level of club for Unai Emery, because he's worked better at those kind of clubs, and the fact that Villa have got to those kind of big moments and not quite got over the line, or maybe let themselves down on the big occasion, is the reason why Emery's at someone like Villa and not at someone like Real Madrid. I think that's what you were trying to say to me. Is that the point you were trying to make?
Yeah, that wasn't so much my opinion. Very close. If you remember when Emery first joined Villa, the suggestion by a lot of people that talk about football regularly was that that'll be a good opportunity for him, because it's a middling club, a team that are struggling a little bit, that he will be able to help get better, because we've seen him do that at Valencia,
And it's exactly what he's done.
who he made clearly the third best team in La Liga behind Real Madrid and Barcelona, who were both managed by Mourinho and Guardiola at the time, remember? And then he went to Sevilla and took on, won so many Europa Leagues with them. And then latterly with Villarreal, who he took to Champions League semi-final, and then also,
which is incredible.
Yeah, and also won the Europa League with them. But then look at the clubs in the middle. Forget Spartak Moscow; that was just a misfit. But you look at Arsenal and PSG; those were the two real big clubs that he was at the time. And PSG, he will always be remembered for the throwaway in the Champions League, and then failing, and then only winning, the Ligue 1 once out of the two times when PSG expected to win it both times, and then Arsenal, it didn't quite go to plan for him. So mitigating circumstances at both clubs, admittedly. Arsenal more so because he was coming in to replace Arsene Wenger and he didn't really have the full support that he should have. He didn't have full overseeing of transfers. At Villa, he's got everything. We know that now. There's probably no club in the world that will give him the level of freedom and control that he has at Villa. So it's all on him. And, he can pick who he wants to have alongside him. He can pick the players. It's his say. If Unai says this, we'll do this. Absolutely fine. And that's worked for Villa. They have hired an elite level manager at a time when they were not an elite level club, and now they are close to becoming an elite team again because they've been in the Champions League. They finished sixth last season, and they're hoping to get back into the Champions League again. The hiring of Unai Emery has worked for Aston Villa. What happens next is, it doesn't have to all hinge on Unai Emery. There will be an Aston Villa after Unai Emery, and Villa are now at the stage. Now, this is the key point I want to make. When Emery was signed by Villa, there probably was no one better that they could find, because look where Villa were. How can you, and Mauricio Pochettino, remember, was the other guy that they were interested in getting, and he just had a time at PSG himself, and was there really the interest from him to come and join Villa, who was 17th in the table, and be prepared for a dogfight? This is something I've gone into a lot, by the way, in my book. No, that there wasn't. Emery was prepared to come and do it. Nice link there, Dan. I like it. There's a barcode flashing up on the screen there for you guys if you want to pre-order the book.
I think that's past me, Greg.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Villa were looking at managers who they had no real right to go and get at that point because of where they were in the Premier League. But now they're in a much different position. And the argument I was having with you over text message, which nobody listening would be privy to, but I'll go into close detail with it now. Dan thinks once Unai Emery goes from Aston Villa, that's the end of Aston Villa. I don't.
No, not what I said.
I think there is definitely a future for Aston Villa after Unai Emery.
And I agree with that. What I was trying to say was, you talked to me about Villa's setup. I think Villa's setup is probably all round better now than it was when he walked through the door. I wouldn't deny that, right? But Villa at the time Unai Emery came through the door had a squad that was good enough to finish in the top 7 of the Premier League, because that's ultimately what that squad did. So that squad was good enough under the right manager to finish 7th in the Premier League. Now, they had the wrong manager, and they were 17th when Unai Emery came in, and he did unbelievably to rise us up to 7th. And I think by doing that and qualifying for Europe for that first season and making Villa attractive again, that set off a chain of events that's enabled Villa to get to where they are now. But I still think without Unai Emery, none of this stuff happens. And the whole football club is geared around Unai Emery. You've just said it yourself. Anyone that comes in, even in, I'm talking about the data team and the medical team, there's a heavy Unai Emery contingent there. Anything he wants, he gets. Now, hopefully this day is miles off in the future, and it's not something we really have to ever talk about doing these shows in the near future. I just worry and think the day Unai Emery leaves, I don't think... there's no guarantees that Villa stay where they are if Unai Emery leaves. I actually think it's more likely they go back to what they were pre-Unai Emery. And I take what you're saying, that Villa are more established now. They've got a better backroom set up. But I actually think Aston Villa at the moment is Unai Emery. And I think if he goes, I think that would be a huge, huge problem for us. I really believe that. I believe he's that important. I'm not sure I've explained that great, but what I'm trying to say is I think Unai Emery is so important that the day he leaves, it's more likely Villa go back to somewhere near what they were before he walked through the door than it is someone comes in and picks up and keeps them where they are. Does that make sense?
That's no, 100%, and I agree with you. I agree with you on that.
Oh, well, you said you didn't say on the
no,
text earlier.
hear me out. I agree with you that I think it's more likely that when Unai Emery leaves, Villa will go back towards where they were previously, but it shouldn't be, and there should really be no excuse for it because Villa have progressed as a club. They are now in a position where if Emery was to go tomorrow, there would be, I'd say, okay, Villa aren't in the Champions League, but 95% of managers in the world would look at that Villa job and want to take it on. There would not be many that would look at it and think, "Nah, that's not for me." That Villa would have so many managers looking at that. But take it back to when Emery was first appointed, there were lots of managers that weren't interested in that job. Villa were fighting in a different field, and to compare Emery and Steven Gerrard would be wrong because that's just one man versus another man. And you look at when Gerrard was appointed, Villa were again hiring from a completely different field. They were replacing Dean Smith and bringing a manager in who they had hopes would kick on in the future, but wasn't fully established as an elite winner. Somebody who had been there and done it across various multiple clubs because Villa weren't there. They weren't at that position to be able to get a manager like that in. It just wasn't an option. They couldn't go to a Champions League club, for example, and take a manager off them because he just wouldn't have joined. They were very fortunate in some ways to get Unai Emery, and the reasons how they were able to get him, myself and Matt, who have written the book, have detailed that in at length in the book, and it's a really interesting read to understand that. But my point is now, I would be fearful for what happens next with Villa if Emery leaves, but the club, where they are at and how they've progressed, should not be fearful. They should be thinking of succession planning in the future. They should be in the position to be able to, to think of Villa being able to continue this run, regardless of who's in charge now. They really should. But I totally take your point, and what I've said earlier, the whole club is built around Unai Emery. So the day he leaves, it's so much he's going to break up.
It's not something that's on the. I mean, hopefully we're not giving it the kiss of death there. But it's not something that's on the cards at all. We just thought this would be an interesting topic to talk about today. So let's live in that hypothetical universe. And you would assume Villa, as a big club, would actually have a succession plan if something was to happen that took Unai away from them tomorrow. So let's say Unai leaves tomorrow, God forbid. Who do you think Villa would be targeting as a manager? What kind of coach? As a really low, it's a hard question.
Who I don't know. Obviously, I wouldn't know, but at this stage because there's no plans for him to leave. But let's just talk about tiers of managers. Villa will be looking.
And do you think he's in the top tier?
Yeah, I think I do. Yeah.
You're not 100% sure, though.
No, I mean, look, to be in the real, to be in the real top tier of managers, you've got to go and win leagues regularly, haven't you? And win Champions League. And Emery's got one league on, 4 Europa Leagues, is it? Pretty damn good. There aren't many better managers than him, but record wise, there are, unfortunately. And I suppose until he's got those titles, he's never going to be classed as in the Guardiolas, and some of the other high-level managers that have won plenty.
Luis Enrique now. Again.
Well, yeah, he's won 2 Champions League, hasn't he?
See, I don't think many managers could replicate what he's done.
No, and this
that's what makes him elite.
Feeling really negative and it's.
I don't think
he
does.
Not,
I think we're just testing things out.
Absolutely not. It's Emery's an elite level manager. We've said that now. But to go,
and I wouldn't change him for anyone.
I mean, no.
Genuinely, I wouldn't.
Again, I'm not sure too many managers could have done any better. Probably not, because you look at all the good things, again, they outweigh the bad ones. But, let's not get this sort of mixed up that Unai Emery is now getting a sort of middle ranked team performing higher than they should. That was the case in the first season, but Villa have spent
maybe the second to an extent as well.
I think to get Villa to fourth, with that group was overperforming, but to finish in the top 6 would not have been an exaggeration with with the group of players that they had. And then this season, certainly they had a squad that was good enough to be in the top 6. So, expectations increase, don't they, with success. And Villa have spent a lot of money now. Villa have put together a squad that, with the amount of money they've spent, should be in the top 6, if not the top 5.
I think as well, if Villa had, I mean, it's all easy to say with hindsight, I think Villa have had the squad they ended the season with. I think we're talking about Villa being top 3. They'd had that squad the whole way through the season.
Yeah, because look,
but they got the first half of the season
13 wins out of the last 17 games in all competitions. I know there's a couple of championship teams in there, but that was a very, very solid run of results. And over the course of the season, that would have definitely got them into the Champions League. The main, as I said earlier in the pod, the main problem was failing to beat Ipswich twice, Manchester United twice, and probably Tottenham. But then also that really bad run of form, which was the worst run of form in Emery's career, where I think he didn't win 7 games. Was it 7 games in all competitions that he didn't win around about the October time, I think it might have been. I suppose if a manager has that run in a season, inevitably there's going to be some backlash from it.
What we're saying is, although we've gone around the houses a little bit and spoken about lots of different things and lived in lots of parallel universes, it's that Unai Emery is an elite coach who we both love having at Aston Villa. But you're not going to get away without answering my question that I asked. If Unai Emery went tomorrow, what kind of manager do you think they'd be going for? Who's a name that you think they'd go for?
Someone like Antonio Conte.
Hello? Happened there?
Someone like Antonio Conte, for example, a serial winner. He's won a league in England, he's won a league in Italy. You're looking at serial winners that are going to be. Villa would be looking at the very top elite. And whether
Conte though.
Look, that's just you just said give me a name, and I'm thinking of somebody who's won, or Arne Slot. Then somebody who's won.
Well, we won't get Arne Slot tomorrow.
They're not going to get Arne Slot from Liverpool, are they? But what I'm saying is, if you're saying what type of manager are you looking for, it's got to be somebody who has won multiple titles somewhere, because that's what Villa are missing. That's where Villa need to go. That's why Villa are signing players for multi-million pounds every single year to try and take them up to the elite.
I know he's probably going to go to Saudi, but I would have said Inzaghi. That would have been my shout.
There's going to be a long list of managers, isn't there?
Sometimes as a football club, you end up just having the perfect manager. He might not be a fit everywhere, but for you, he's that perfect manager. And I think he's perfect for Villa, and I wouldn't change him for anyone. I hope he's here for the next 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, I mean, look, but so what happens though if he does go? Is that the end of Aston Villa as a team pushing for the Champions League then?
I think it's a dark day. Honestly,
why should it be? If Villa are at this point now where they're a team pushing into the Champions League, why does it have to end now? Why can't it continue? Why can't the club look at it and say we're gonna hire a manager who is level to Unai Emery, who is at that level?
Let me throw a situation at you. Why, since Pochettino's gone from Tottenham, have they never been the same?
Because they've picked the wrong managers,
Yeah, because it's not easy to get that fit.
Of course it's not easy. Of course it's not easy. How do you think Liverpool? Do you think any Liverpool fan thought that Arne Slot would come in and be better than Jurgen Klopp? It's all about finding the right manager, but you've got to hire and you've got to be batting in the top pool.
I swore in another podcast earlier. I should plug that podcast whilst we were just talking about other podcasts. I did jump on Claret and Blue earlier with Jacob and Dan Rowlinson to do a Q&A. So do go and check that out. It should be out 7 o'clock, I think he said, this evening on Monday the 2nd. So do go and watch or listen to that wherever you get your podcast. I think we've been through it all now, Greg. I'm not sure what we've achieved.
Neither am I, to be honest. Neither am I.
But hopefully people have found it a little bit interesting, just talking about Villa's manager and focusing solely on him, with a few different topics. So do let us know in the comments if you have enjoyed the show. Let us know if you haven't as well, and we'll take that feedback on board. Don't forget to go and buy Gregg's book. I'm going to flash the QR code up there again for those that are watching via YouTube. What's any book update,
Well,
Gregg?
yeah, there is a book update, and the reason there's a delay in the there's a
Ominous, this
delay in
does.
the publishing date, so it's actually now coming out in July. It was supposed to be due out on the 20th of June, which would have been 18 days away, which seems to have just come around so quick. But not long to wait. Thanks to everybody who's pre-ordered already. There are many of you, so I really appreciate the support. The reason that it's delayed a little bit further is there's just one more addition that we needed to make into the book, which has come to light in recent weeks, and I will be able to explain a little bit more once the book's out. But let me just say this: it's definitely worth the wait.
I was going to say, I'm assuming it's quite a big thing to delay the whole publication of the book and get added in at this late stage. I don't know much about publishing or releasing books, but I'm assuming that's a pretty huge revelation in the book.
It's a good one.
Do let us know what you've made of this episode. I'm not sure what Gregg and I have made of this episode ourselves, but yeah, chat about Unai Emery. So if you've watched via YouTube, if you could subscribe with your post notifications on and give the video a like and a comment as well with your thoughts, that would be absolutely brilliant. I keep saying it, but amazing the amount of people that are watching that aren't subscribed, though I have noticed the subscribers have just gone past 27,000, which is quite big. So thank you very much for that. If you're listening via audio, whether that be Spotify or Apple, leave us a 5 stars and give us a review as well, or a comment on the episode. That would be much appreciated. Some lovely reviews on Apple Podcasts, by the way, so thank you very much for that. There'll be plenty more content coming through the week. Definitely have some stuff out over the next few days, so keep your eyes peeled to the channel and social media channels, and you'll see when the new content is out. That'll do us. Thanks ever so much to Global Gregg Evans for joining me today, and as ever, we'll end with a Up the Villa.